to that in the Bhagavad Gita as well. That secret must be imparted to you from somebody who has self-realization, who is a pure devotee, who is via transparent medium to Krishna, and who is representative of the disciplic succession all the way back to Krishna. So this actual is the qualified person, as Prabhupada used to say, the man in Krishna consciousness. And basically speaking, unless we're in that, and unless we have that infusion that comes from somebody who has the Shakti, who actually has an understanding, and it doesn't mean that everybody is acting on the same level of realization, but they're acting in a representative capacity of somebody who's in the pure realization of Krishna consciousness. And in that way, when you are actually representative of and empowered to represent the disciplic succession, then there is a tangible result from that. The open secret then produces the desired effect. And that person who realizes the self and realizes the signs of self-realization becomes very aware of how we are bound to Krishna and how we are bound to him through love and through devotional service. And again, it says the supreme signs is given to us in a way that has to be understood, and that understanding comes from somebody who is actually in alignment with the spiritual teachings in the disciplic succession, and the disciplic succession itself comes directly from Krishna. And Krishna says that Evam parampara praptam imam rajar sayo viju sakalam eva mahata yoga nashta parantapa. The supreme science was thus received through the chain of disciplic succession, and the saintly kings understood it in that way. But in due course of time, the succession was broken, and therefore the science as it is appears to be lost. So again, we have this coming from Krishna's own words, where he's saying the signs of God realization, the disciplic succession, has been broken, and that science appears to be lost. The loss of understanding then can be understood to be the gross identification with the bodily existence of life, and that's the void of faith or belief in the nature of the Supreme Person, the void of faith in Krishna. Because when you relate to the bodily and you're on a concept of life, when you relate to the body as matter and you're engaged in that as you are the controller of the matter, the more you engage in that process, the less you actually cultivate the process that Krishna is the doer, and Krishna is in control of everything, including the matter which we inhabit, which is the body. So that meditation on matter and material substance, beginning with our own identification with the body, actually gradually erodes our capacity to identify with not being the body, and therefore engage in the process of self-realization. And the loss of understanding of Krishna, or his supremacy, his position as the ultimate goal of life, as the creator, as the maintainer, the doer of all actions, which Krishna refers to throughout the Bhagavad Gita, that total loss of understanding of our own infinitesimal position in this sense of the whole creation and our eternal connection with God is explained by Krishna himself. And he says, basically speaking, that results in the break of the disciplic succession. From the Acharya comes the disciplic succession and the teachings, and it's repeated throughout the ages. And when a break in that happens, then people become more materialistic and more caught up in mundane activities. So now we can see from that short purport that Srila Prabhupada did that there's so many connections there, and there's so much information in that short purport. And as he said, he doesn't pick his words without consideration. For the science of Krishna consciousness to manifest the result of self-realization, that confidential open secret then has to have a bona fide structure, a source, a guru disciplic succession for it to work, and that's where the potency lies. And that is alluded to by Ananda when he says that this knowledge was given to the sages and then they moved on because he already had that connection. So when Narada was impregnated with that confidential knowledge and that pure love of God and that path of self-realization, that Shakti continues on through everything you do in devotional service, and it does produce a tangible change, and that actually comes from the grace of the saintly persons, the guru. And again, if the experiment of self-realization, the experiment of implementing the processes of God consciousness, we should see tangible results. There should be a tangible change in our life, and if there's not, then we have to go back to the drawing board and we have to actually question ourselves. Are we following the instructions that are laid down in the scriptures? Like, did we do what Prabhupada told us to do? He just said, do what I do and everything will be fine. But are we deviating? Are we practicing that 10%? Are we making that our goal of life? If that isn't happening, and if we're not practicing by the sole mercy and grace of a bona fide source, well then, concoction comes in and deviation comes in, and therefore we don't have that end result. And it mentions also the association of devotees as being key to bringing about that quick change, and that phrase quick change is used, and that's an amazing kind of relationship, that not only do you get the knowledge and it's given to you from a bona fide source, but by giving the association of the devotees, other people who are engaged in that process, other people who are your well-wishers, other people who are themselves engaging in the processes and sharing the knowledge, sharing the enthusiasm to follow that, that will bring about a quick change in the process, a quick change. And that quick change you can see sometimes when people join, like often I see somebody, and you find some bibliography written up somewhere on some training course or whatever, and you say, oh, such and such a Prabhu or such and such a Devi Dasi has been a devotee since the year 2002, and next of all they're going, whew, they're flying it, you're thinking, my God, they're just in the door a wet day and they seem to be just like flying it, and this has to do with not only their own particular trajectory and their own karmic entry into the path in this lifetime, but it also has to do with the association of themselves and engaging their mind in the process and engaging in it 100%, but also the association that they align themselves to. And you can see that some people are naturally gravitate towards those devotional relationships which will enhance their understanding, which will enhance their existence, and will enhance their own desire to advance within spiritual life. And we can see that happen all the time. And so concise is that science that we see positive conditions where there are tangible results. And the instructions for actually, getting to that stage and why association is very important is clearly given by Sri Rupa Goswami in the Nectar of Instruction. He clearly emphasizes the different processes that devotees have to engage in. And if you look at text 3 in the Nectar of Devotion, he says quite clearly, Utstan Nishayad Daryat Tatat Kamara Pravartanat Sangatva Gyat Sato Frate Sabir Bhaktir Prashidyate. There are 6 principles favourable of execution of devotional service. One is being enthusiastic, endeavouring with confidence, being patient, acting according to regulative principles such as Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, hearing, chanting and remember Krishna, abandoning the association of non-devotees and following the footsteps of the previous acharyas. These 6 principles undoubtedly assure the complete success of pure devotional service. Okay, so here we have a formula, scientific formula. If you've put them into practice, you're not going to go far wrong. You will notice a tangible change taking place. And not only that, but we see in there the ingredients that Prabhupada has actually mentioned, we see that there's 9 processes of bhakti contained within that, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, hearing, chanting, remembering and so on. And then there's also the prime engagement of this yuga, Kali Yuga, is there like Kirtanam, chanting of the holy name. And following in the previous Acharya's footsteps means containing your devotional life in a framework that's approved of by the Vaishnava Acharyas. And when you do that, you're walking, like, sometimes when you're doing research on a particular paper or a particular topic, you might use Google Scholar or something like that. And when you go onto Google Scholar and you're looking up transcripts or citations on a particular paper, you will see, they have their slogan or their catchphrase underneath to walking or standing on the shoulder of giants and walking in their footsteps kind of thing. And it's like that. If you see a child and a child is trying to emulate what the parent is doing, sometimes you'll see a child will put on the adult's shoes and try to walk like that. Or if you're walking along a beach, you'll see them trying to walk in the footsteps of the parent. And that's exactly what we do as neophyte devotees. We try to emulate what is given to us from the Vaishnavacharyas and from those senior devotees, from our Shiksha gurus and from those we aspire to as Diksha gurus. And but it implies that there is some level of surrender there. And the following of the previous Acharya's footsteps can only be done when we ourselves adhere to the instructions of a bona fide spiritual master. But Krishna himself says there is a way of doing that, and that's inquiring submissively. And that implies a great level of surrender and means giving up the false ego. And we've read in the purport again how association is paramount for those conditions to take place. And change doesn't only manifest, but it blossoms in devotional service if Rupa Goswami's instructions are followed. And he's saying abandon non-devotee association, and that makes sense. If you're going to try to take part in devotional life, hanging out with the cool dudes who are kind of smoking and drinking and all kinds of stuff, it doesn't really make sense, does it? And but having said that, we need to equip ourselves in a way that we can preach in those circumstances. And again, you will see that there's 3 different categories of devotees mentioned, and for the neophyte devotee, if they're not strong enough to preach on that front line, they need to actually have sufficient training and sufficient support in order to come to that platform. Association is everything, and we tend to gravitate towards those people who enhance our spiritual lives, and that's a natural thing. If devotional service makes a positive outcome, then the opposite can be said of having non-devotional association as well. You'll have a negative outcome. And in the purport of text number 3 of the next instruction, Srila Prabhupada says, and I'm going to read this because it's very interesting, and we read it all the time, but I think it's important to revisit it every now and again. Devotional service is not a matter of sentimental speculation or imaginative ecstasy. It's substance in a practical activity. So, it's a substance resulting from a practical activity, and that stands to reason because he said there will be a tangible change from taking part in this process. That is an extremely profound statement. There's no speculation or empty theory there, and is accepted as mundane science. So it has a substance, and we've read again that there is a tangible change that immediately happens for self-realization. And then again, it goes on further in the purport. It says that happens through grace and mercy. And in this regard, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu told Rupa Goswami, Brahmanda Brahmate Kruna Bhagyavan Jiva Guru Krishna Prasade Praya Bhakti Lata Bij. In the course of transversing the universal creation of Brahma, some fortunate soul may receive the seed of Bhakti Lata, the creeper of devotional service, and this is all by the grace of Guru and Krishna. So it's not something that we can do by ourselves. We need to have that. And again, in this text, Prabhupada had said that it's by the grace of the sages, and that quote was quoted from Madhya Lila 19.151. These conditions again differentiate between the open knowledge of Krishna as a worldly sense and the confidential knowledge that was spoken of Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, and the benefits of chanting the holy names have the same level of potency, but it's not always realized without that mercy. So you can have people who chant all the time, but they don't seem to make as much progress as somebody who's chanting in a way that has actually I suppose being suffused with the other knowledges of devotional services and the other practices of the devotional life. And that makes a difference. These days we can see that there's a lot of events actually advertised, for kirtan and chanting and sacred mantra chanting. And in fact, Ireland is actually swamped with kirtan. And if you go and look at it, you'll see kirtans happening all over Ireland, and quite a large amount of them are fee-paying sessions with a host of spectacular personalities, or people who are meant to be a somebody. But like Prabhupada has mentioned about before, professional reciters of Bhagavatam, these persons who treat the chanting of kirtan or the chanting of the holy name as a profiteering component to actually build their egotistical kind of evolution, or to become a yogi or some kind of social influencer, offer very little in the way of real knowledge or the potency of the holy name. And they don't offer anything in the terms of value in the science of self-realization. They themselves are lacking in tangible changes in their lives, and we can see that somebody who's kind of out there and propounding themselves as a great kirtaneer, and my next session will be in such and such a place, a venue, a yoga studio, or whatever, and it'll be such and such amount to get in. And you'll see them, and they'll put up pictures of themselves singing, kind of their head held high to heaven, and with some very ethnic instrument. And then afterwards, they'll post on their Facebook page, kind of like, and here we are enjoying a glass of wine. And so there's an incompatibility of that type of lifestyle. So basically speaking, even though they have heard kirtan, even though they try to themselves engage in kirtan, without that actually infusion of real knowledge of devotion, without that mercy, that shakti that comes in the disciplic succession, they themselves are lacking the tangible results of actually taking part in that chanting. And yes, chanting Krishna's name will bring results, and they will bring a tangible change, but over a period of time the trajectory will be far, far slower. It's not that Krishna withholds mercy from his holy name. His name in himself is the same, but it's the consciousness, the intent, the connection, and the process that the neophyte would engage in that makes the difference of whether you gain the full benefit of that connection, and it doesn't happen without mercy. I was at a small group meeting once with His Holiness Ananda Maharaj, and a young devotee raised the issue of being in association with people from other Vaishnava traditions and schisms that happen along the path. And he was relating to something that went on within the area that he was a devotee, and somebody was like, nearly kind of Star Wars style, but somebody who had gone to the other side, in other words, they'd left and gone to another faction of Vaishnavas, or people who had actually previously had some connection with ISKCON or whatever, and because they felt they weren't treated very nicely in ISKCON. They felt that they hadn't received the attention that they should have, or that they had been treated nastily. And it was a very touchy subject, and it's kind of controversial subject that people raise sometimes at these gatherings. And sometimes these questions are asked to get a particular style of answer. It's nearly like kind of trying to elicit some type of response that would I suppose bolster their own position or thinking on it. And the young devotee was trying to go further into this and asking, would they be saved, and could they become equally God-realized if they went down this other path? And I thought Maharaj answered it in a very pragmatic way, and I thought it was good considering he was kind of asked it in such a way to elicit a particular response. And I think that it's really important, because we don't become lost then in our egotistic elitism in the answer that Maharaj gave. And we can actually be like that. We can be quite elitist sometimes, thinking, ours is the only way, and kind of born again Hare Krishna. And, we have to remember that we're a preaching movement, and we are there, and we're meant to be full of compassion for all the fallen souls. So sometimes we can actually, pontificate a little bit. And, we have Srila Prabhupada on our side. But the thing about it is that, we have to be aware that everybody's on their own spiritual journey, and our goal is to get everybody to bring Krishna into their lives, and that was Prabhupada's mission. And so not to be egotistic or elitist within our own society, but understanding why we are a society and why Prabhupada put us like that. And he said, and obviously I'm paraphrasing because like obviously I didn't dictate notes at the meeting, but he said that others may become self-realized and if they follow proper instruction. And Srila Prabhupada himself had said that there are within other faiths people who become fully Krishna conscious if they follow their own spiritual instruction very carefully and evolve that way. And with regard to other Vaishnavas, he said, well, who are we to say who will become Krishna conscious or not? We ourselves are simply on that journey. And in this whole world, or the three worlds, it would be naive to think that there are only a few of us who will ever progress in bhakti. But in saying that, he said, I feel that we have Srila Prabhupada and his mercy has no bounds, and there's only one Srila Prabhupada. And that made a huge impression on me. I remember thinking, wow, that's such faith, such convinced faith that like we have Prabhupada and all we have to do is follow him. But in that regard, not to be worried about other people not following Prabhupada, that actually our goal is to just give love of God freely, and those people who are meant to follow will follow. But that's not to say that other people will not ever become God conscious. And it avoided all of the kind of controversy and politics that were there, but it was such a strong statement that we have Srila Prabhupada and his mercy knows no bounds. And I thought it was a fantastic statement to actually give to all devotees, but especially this young devotee. And I was very impressed with it. And it didn't have any kind of irrationality behind it, and it didn't have any conditioning, institutional conditioning behind it. But what it had was a real understanding that Srila Prabhupada now acknowledged that bhakti can manifest in any person's heart if they're given the right conditions and the right cultivation, and avoided all of that controversy. But Srila Prabhupada's mercy is the core of our experience and how we develop in Krishna consciousness in this particular movement. And that personification of mercy that Srila Prabhupada brought with him, in my particular opinion, is exactly what we're talking about in this verse. It's the actual mercy that comes via the realized souls, and that actually brings you to the process where that science will manifest and replicate within your own life, and then love of God will then manifest within you too. And that's the difference between the signs of God consciousness and somebody being ultimately atheistic or mundane about a scientific process, is that if we apply this process, you will see tangible changes in our lives, while you may have somebody who has spent their whole life in some theoretical chase, some kind of deluded chase after some theory that will never be proven and will not make a tangible change in their eternal life, irrespective of what it does in their mundane life. And of course, not all scientists were always atheistic. Some acknowledged that Krishna, or indeed God, was the doer, and they accepted that the intelligence, and they still accept that their intelligence is really just a manifestation of his mercy. And many devotee scientists exist within our own movement, but also even famous scientists such as Newton and even Darwin in his time didn't have an atheistic approach at all times during their life. That was something that really developed as a result of different circumstances. And when people don't have implicit faith in God, when their faith is rocked because they're facing atrocity or some crisis, and we have people facing crisis now, instead of turning to God, they turn away. And this is the case where some of those scientists actually gave up their faith. And in the Middle Ages also, there was a split between science and the church, and it became a breeding place for atheistic science to emerge and become dominant. And nowadays it nearly becomes a prerequisite that in order to be some type of scientist, that you have to deny creationism, and you have to deny the existence of God in order to become recognized within your own scientific community. And although at the moment there is a movement ongoing to represent scientists of faith, and there's a small emergence of that again, but there has been an erasure tactic to completely wipe out any trace of creationism and God consciousness out of the picture. Just as easy as a child would take an eraser and rub a pencil line from a piece of paper, it's just gone. And using science theory and speculation to do that has become commonplace, but that's how ludicrous is that, to simply say that there's no God and we resulted from some cosmic event or an accident, and from chaos we came from, total nothingness into some type of mundane enlightenment without any spiritual input, is pretty much madness, and it pretty much is delusion. And what's even more delusional is that it's completed under the guise of having greater knowledge and greater scientific approach and transparency, and it's really just theoretical speculation. We can't be sure what's going on in somebody's head, but for a whole species of people who came from an enlightened, because ultimately we all come from an enlightened perspective, to come from that, believing that from nothingness we exist as we are, and we'll go back to nothingness, but aren't we the top level of existence, is quite crazy, and if you ask any of those scientists, they'll say, well, there was a Big Bang, we think, but we're not quite sure, and but you should believe it because it's science, but where is the fact? There isn't. It's all theoretical. Where is the fact? And even modern astronomers and physicists and celebrities like Professor Brian Cox and the likes of him, they'd be asked what was there before the Big Bang, and they say, well, we just don't know. We think it was dark matter, but that's great because that's science, And then if you ask them to give a definition of dark matter, or what was there, the emptiness or the vacuum of space that was there before their current theoretical understanding of the Big Bang or anything else is there, they can't give you any precise definition of what they thought existed. And there's no empirical evidence, there's no facts, there's nothing tangible. And in the same way, if they want to take the scientific notation, they couldn't repeat it in the same way, same conditions, same circumstances, and get a factual result time and time again. So it's not a pure science. In actual fact, it's not science at all. It's non-science, or it's nonsense. And yet we have people here who would consider that like God's consciousness isn't science, and we have Narada and Srila Prabhupada telling us it is a scientific process. The scriptures that we have are thousands of years old. They've been taught to countless generations of all different levels of people of realization, and they give a precise detail of how the cosmic creation has been there, how it has developed, and that's been passed on from in disciplic succession, and again has been impregnated by Krishna at the heart of it. And it's the conclusion of all scientific knowledge that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So irrespective of these creation and all the different worlds and the three worlds and everything else that's in the whole material existence, the whole spiritual existence, the total sum and bonum of that, the total conclusion of that is Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that is the total knowledge of all science, whether it's non-religious, religious, or theoretical or factual. It's the total knowledge of all sciences that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Krishna himself, he says, Mayam tatam idam sarvam jagat avakya murchanya mastani sarva bhutane nachayam tu vavastiha. By me, in my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded. All beings are in me, but I am not in them. So this is the ultimate goal of all science. Now, admittedly, we have major division within our own movement about the science of creation, whether the earth is round or it is flat. And if we want to be able to preach about this, yes, you do require an understanding of that. For me personally, as mad and as controversial as that statement would be, it doesn't really affect me to a great extent. I can see that there's a need to have some kind of scientific collaboration that allows a healthy debate about the act of creation, the geographic and astrophysical nature of the material world, if we want to present that to those certain communities. and we have plenty of descriptions within all the scriptures, and yet we have factionism about it, which doesn't make sense if we're to have a cohesive approach in that preaching. So to see things in terms of the eyes of the scriptures and open debate, which is valid in our disciplic succession and also within our framework, is fine. But for me personally, at the end of the day, it's not high up on my agenda, because while we're building a whole temple on Vedic cosmology, it's not going to change things in the greater scheme of my life, or at my limited level of intelligence, and certainly not at my age. I feel that to fight on a platform where I'll be confronting something that I haven't got in-depth knowledge of, or something that would be kind of, I suppose, controversially debated for a number of years, won't bring me near to the focus or solution that I need to be preaching the philosophy that Prabhupada gave me of getting people to chant Hare Krishna or bringing them into their lives. So it takes somebody much more qualified, somebody who's that way inclined, and I totally surrender onto that. It wouldn't be for me, because I don't have that level of knowledge. But Lord Chaitanya himself bowed down to a spiritual master and said that he would just chant the glories of Krishna because he felt himself just a fool. And if it's good enough for Lord Chaitanya, I can certainly stand over that statement myself and let other people to do it. But I would like to see that for that level of science, you know, if we're talking about that type of manifestation of different astrophysical and geographical kind of construction of the universe, that there would be more collaboration on it rather than division and derision of each other. But certainly for preaching the chanting of the holy name, we can all be qualified to do that, and our qualification is to get the mercy of the spiritual master and to repeat what they've taught us. And so if I can do that over the next decade, if I'm lucky to last around that long, then that's what I can do. And when I joined the movement, this was what was asked of me, to chant Hare Krishna and to preach the chanting of Hare Krishna, and to bring the holy names of Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, to the masses. And that's what our mood should be. So this confidential nature of science of transcendental knowledge is imparted through disciplic succession, and Narada was taken into that system where he took initiation. And Srila Prabhupada came to us and offered us that same mercy, irrespective of our previous misdeeds and conditions. And we should also be as merciful and full of compassion for all the false souls in that respect. And under the instruction of a bona fide spiritual master, a self-realized soul, one can be elevated from the platform of mundane existence to the platform of devotional service. And by executing those processes of bhakti, we can see that there will be tangible results. And this is referred to in Srila Prabhupada's purport, that there is going to be a tangible change if you actually put this process into practice. And it has to be somebody who can encourage you and enthuse you to do that. And Krishna again, he said, Janani Vas Tattva Darshana, Janani Vas, the self-realized will give you the truth. Tattva, because they've seen the truth. And then if you look at that, whereas I wouldn't be some kind of scholar in Sanskrit, and it's not my forte, it certainly seems to me that there's two ways of interpreting that to a certain extent. One is that the darshana, the seers, they have actually realized, and that's a very deep thing, you know, because they have seen the truth. They can impart that knowledge because they have seen it. To see the truth, to actually be that level of realized, I have no conception of. I have really no conception of that. For somebody to have seen Krishna within their heart profoundly and to realize Krishna in that level, that's somebody that deserves to be instructing people in spiritual life. And we know that song, The Seers of the Truth, but it's not a sentimental thing. It's like to understand the absolute truth that's on a platform that exists, but personally it's far, far away from me, but we know it's there. The Uttama Adhikari, the person who is in full God consciousness. And then also the other side of that is you know, somebody who takes darshan, who takes the darshan of Krishna, who takes the mercy and then imparts that mercy to other people. Maybe we don't have the full qualification, maybe we don't have every level that self-realized soul has, but because we're acting on their instruction, and because we're acting in that particular mood, we give Krishna just as it is, or as he is, so to speak. And Srila Prabhupada gave that famous lecture, Krishna speak for himself. So if we become the medium where that happens, well then we too can instruct, we too can act in that way as somebody who's deputized to act or empowered to act on behalf of the disciplic succession, as somebody who knows their position and is repeating. And Prabhupada often said that, just repeat what I've told you. And we can understand that without any great intelligence, with just the limited amount of intelligence, as we implement the process, then we can also engage other people. So if you take that darshan as Krishna's mercy through faith, belief and complete realization, the ultimate goal is just there to develop, and that loving devotional service and understanding will develop as a result of implementing the scientific process of love of God. So just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master, inquire from him submissively and render service unto him. The self-realized soul can impart knowledge unto you because he has seen the truth. Now, Madam Mohan was mentioning the other day that he felt exposed because of his false ego in the class comments, but it is that false ego that actually balks or rebels against surrendering, and a feeling of loss and independence or sense of engagement or attachment to a lower, different station of life. But surrender in spiritual life happens on all levels, and the first level of surrender may be in fact easier to surrender to somebody else because you feel that that person is more realized. So that may be, at one stage it may seem like an easier level of surrender, but obviously in order to fulfill our own mission within this life, it's often harder to surrender to ourselves. And that means surrendering to our true nature, because we know that within us we have that capacity to have pure love of God. We know that we should be living a devotional life, but surrendering to, that devotional part of us, and actually, negating all of those other conditioned parts of us, the parts that has the false ego, the parts that want to be the sense enjoyer, the part that actually wants to detract away from our spiritual life. That's maybe the harder surrender, and it's really, really difficult to come truthful to yourself rather than try to, seem to be pleasing somebody that is quite obviously at a higher level. And Krishna says this, he says, the living entities who are in conditioned worlds are my internal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which includes the mind. And actually that mind is where we fan the false ego. That mind is the one that puts up the rebellion against surrender and implementing pure devotional practices, and keeps us contained and attached to our mundane life. And Krishna is saying that if you don't, your conditioned life will keep you struggling into your six senses, and that includes the mind. And the mind and the conscious conditioned parts puts many prohibitions and barriers on our progressive path of God consciousness. And in that respect, Krishna also says that the mind will either be the greatest friend or the greatest enemy. And so the process is freely available as a most confidential knowledge and an open secret, but whether we're going to go with that means total surrender, and it means that we need to accept that we are in need of mercy from somebody else, and that self-realization then will manifest in anybody who takes to that route, to that path, and takes it sincerely into their hearts. And again, in terms of our ability to do that, well, it says nobody can understand the transcendental nature, form or quality of pastimes of Sri Krishna through his materially contaminated senses. Only when one becomes purely spiritually saturated by transcendental service to the Lord, and the transcendental name, form, quality and pastimes of the Lord will be revealed to them. So back to Rasamrita Sindhu says this, and that is a fact, as long as we are, stuck in a materially contaminated sense framework, we can't actually move to a spiritual platform. We will put up barriers time and time again. So false ego is there, but the mind is the vehicle by which we kind of keep fanning that false ego and putting the barriers in place. So again, there's 9 processes there, and those 9 processes, if implemented, are the leverage that we need in order to take us from the mundane to the spiritual. So Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Parasadanam, Nachanam, Bandam, Dasham, Sakyam, and Atman Nivedam. It's really, really important that we make the transition by implementing all of our senses in all the different processes of bhakti, and that culminates in actually the chanting of the Lord's holy name at every waking moment, and hopefully in every sleeping moment, but I don't think we have too much control over that. And that actually brings forth people to the platform of self-realization, the platform of devotion. And it says, anyone who by his actions, minds and words lives only for the transcendental loving service of the Lord is certainly a liberated soul, even though he may appear to be in a conditioned material existence. And that's us. We're in material conditioned existence, but we are trying to emerge, just as the butterfly tries to come out of its cocoon. But basically speaking, we're trying to emerge into a spiritual life. We're trying to emerge as spiritual beings, and we're in that kind of, everybody obviously at their own stage of development, but we're in that process of emerging from the material to the spiritual. But it's very significant here that it says anyone can do this. Anyone. There is no prohibition on who can take to this process. And again, we can see that to the qualifications of mercy, that it's freely given. Prabhupada, he came to the West and he gave that freely to everybody. So anybody can take to this process. And then we can see in text 6, then it refers again to the status of Narada's mother, single mother, sole provider, low occupational status as a maidservant. And these designations didn't actually disbar her from being self-realized or the position of guru or teacher. In fact, as the great sages were the instructions of Narada, so too was his mother. And she did everything to allow him to try gain the mercy. She encouraged him to gain the mercy. And it says that there was a special bond between them. And that's the nature of being a mother, I suppose. The unconditional love is there for all your children, no matter what the circumstances. And of course, we have perennial reference to the Irish mothers and their sons. I can only attest to having 3 children, all very different. But that bond never diminishes, even when, in day-to-day life they could drive you crazy. You probably drive them crazy, but the bond doesn't diminish. And the mother's role is not only a nurturing one from a material survival or bonding relationship one. Often she's the one who enforces the discipline or gives the early instructions and actually the early teaching to the child. So this is guru in its own right, to discipline and instruct with the loving relationship of the best interests of the child. And so Nara's mother took that role. And so in that sense, there is no disbarment. The fact that it says, she was a single mother and she was a maidservant in a lowly kind of position, that no disbarment to actually instructing somebody in taking advantage of the mercy of the saintly person and becoming God realized. So Nara's mum had taken this and allowed him to develop as her only son and offered him what she could to develop this. And it's something that we can learn from, because Srila Prabhupada, he had no qualms about this. He said material status is not a criteria for becoming a guru. It's based on qualification. And Srila Prabhupada gave the analogy of the son of the bank manager in relation to the caste Brahmins mentality, that the father may be a bank manager but doesn't automatically qualify the son to be one. And similarly, Srila Prabhupada, he came to the West and he went to the most underqualified people, and he came in the mood of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to bestow that kind of causeless mercy, and he produced very tangible results in his disciples, grand disciples, and in the hearts of those he touched. And that qualification he gave us was to repeat what he taught us, spread the holy name of the Lord and the signs of self-realization. And this spreading of the glories of the Lord is recommended in Srimad Bhagavatam 1.1.21 by the sages. Hearing and chanting is the sacrificial process recommended for Kali Yuga. So we have this, Narada Muni himself took to this chanting throughout the universe with the holy names of the Lord. And but that further qualification of who can be the person who's empowered to bring that holy name to the masses is given, and the qualifications of the spiritual master again is given by Srila Rupa Goswami, and Prabhupada really urged us to become Rupanugas, to follow in the footsteps of Rupa Goswami. A sober person who can tolerate the urge to speak, the mind's demands, the anger, the actions of anger, and the urges of the tongue, the belly, and genitals is qualified to make disciples all over the world. So this is the process to engage all our senses, ignoring the mind's demands, and surrender to such a spiritual master in disciplic succession. By his mercy, and not only merely our own endeavours, we can engage in a scientific process of self-realisation and developing love of Krishna. So in these two verses we can understand the nature of the process, the procedures of engaging in the science of God consciousness, and it's based on surrendering and gaining the mercy of a qualified spiritual master. It's open to everybody who inquires submissively, and not by any material designation or qualification or stature. Again, to conclude, Srila Prabhupada describes how this science is unlike material science, and why they cannot see beyond the material nature, in a lecture in Srimad Bhagavatam 1.8.19, and he stated that it's because Maya is acting as a curtain. They think that this material nature is the working of everything, but the whole world is covered by the modes of material nature. Therefore, the science of God consciousness or self-realization is practiced by the processes of devotional service, knowledge imparted by submissive inquiry, and again by disregarding material conceptions and false ego, and imparted by a self-realized pure devotee in disciplic succession, following a process of initiation. That is the scientific process. If we go by that, rendering devotional service, taking the knowledge imparted by the pure devotee, and engaging our mind and all our endeavours in the science of self-realisation, it will produce tangible